Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, with you as always. You can always check out geektherapyradio.com for more information and a way to contact me directly. The first thing you see on geektherapyradio.com is a contact form. It just says, "What's your geek thing?" And basically, it just goes straight to my email inbox. It does not sign you up for any sort of mailing list or sell you anything or anything like that. It's just a way to get in touch with me. Or you can bypass it completely and just email me, Johnny, JOHNNY, at geektherapyradio.com. You can also find me on all the social media, Geek Therapy Radio Podcast on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, just all the social medias, TikTok even. Yeah, I technically do have a TikTok. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio Podcast and it'll come up all over the place. Look for the red, white, and black color scheme and that's how you know you've got me. All right, I at least wanted to start the show this week on the subject of EVs, and I want to talk about Toyota's promises, for lack of a better word, that they've made a breakthrough in solid-state battery technology and will have cars with over 745 miles of range and da-da-da-da-da, charging in 10 minutes, blah-blah-blah. Well, I'll get to that in a second. I wanted to talk about kind of the realities of the current state of EVs and making a comparison to where the internal combustion engine was at about the same time in their development as EVs are now. So let's just kind of have a general starting point for EV technology as we know it. And by EV technology as we know it, electric vehicle technology as we know it, I mean based on lithium-ion or lithium battery packs. So I know technically Chevy tried to make an electric vehicle back in, when it was it, late 90s or back in the 90s, called the EV1. That was based on lead acid batteries. That's a kind of a very fascinating story there with the EV1 from General Motors, and they basically bought them all back from the customers, and it's kind of a weird tale. Like, the customers loved them so much, they worked out so well for the customer's use case scenario, and then GM's like, no, we need them all back. We're not just going to tell you to stop driving them. We're getting them back from you. Give us back the vehicle you purchased from us. It was really weird. But the EV1 based on lead acid, the Toyota Prius, mid-2000s, the hybrid vehicles started becoming popular. Those were not based on lithium. Those were based on nickel metal hydride, the same exact rechargeable batteries that you put in your TV remote control or other kind of devices, your wireless mice and things like that. That's nickel metal hydride. Before that was nickel cadmium, those really crappy rechargeable batteries from the 1980s and early 90s. So when I'm talking about electric vehicles, I mean the current generation, like electric vehicles as we know it, based on lithium battery packs. And let's just put a date on this. Let's call it EVs as we know it started with the Tesla. I'm going to say the Tesla Model S, even though I know the Roadster came out a few years before the Model S. I think the Tesla Roadster came out 2005-ish, like mid-2000s-ish, before 2010. But that wasn't really widespread adoption. That was very niche. The Model S in around 2012, 2013 marks the beginning of the electric vehicle era as we know it, the mass production and mass adoption of electric vehicles as we know it. So let's call it 2013. So it is now, as of recording, 2023. So we are basically 10 to maybe 15 years maximum, about a decade or so into electric vehicle technology as we know it. Let's put the internal combustion engine back into the same parameters. So the internal combustion engine kind of mass adoption came with the Model T. You can argue a little bit maybe before the Model T, but around the 1910s, right before the 1920s, between the 1910s and 1920s was the internal combustion engine, the automobile, the gasoline automobile as we know it, came about at just about after the turn of the century. So let's fast forward from there, from the 1910s to the 1920s. Let's say it's 1925 and there's different Fords rolling around and it's still, the infrastructure's not there, it's still dirt roads and farms. And you had people Just like you have today with electric vehicles, the doubters and the people who snub it and the people who are afraid of change and afraid of new technology, saying EVs are terrible and blah, blah, blah. The exact same sentiment existed for combustion engine vehicles 10 to 15 years after their mass adoption. You had people who were afraid of change, still on horseback. To a certain degree, they were correct because you didn't have you didn't have the interstate system, you barely had paved roads. It was still very much agricultural based society as far as rural areas were considered, and you had lots of people in rural areas, just like people in rural areas today, badmouth EVs or are afraid of EVs or whatever. You had the same people in the same areas badmouthing the combustion engines versus the horse as we knew it. There was no use for horseless carriages. Horseless carriages were dangerous. Horseless carriages were dirty. They burned dirty fuel and created smoke and blah, blah, blah. There's this 10 to 15 years after mass adoption of the gasoline automobile, you had detractors. That's where we're at right now with electric vehicles. Just you fast forward 100 years from 1923 to 2023. That's the basic notion amongst the doubters of electric vehicles. It's the same kind of mind space that society was in 1923 with the internal combustion engine. I just wanted to make that kind of comparison. That's just the reality of where we're at in kind of the mind space, in the mentality of EV adoption as we know it. EVs aren't a thing really as far as mass adoption as we tend to think they are. It's still a razor edge, bleeding edge technology that is still in its infancy. That's where EVs are right now. So should we throw the baby out with the bathwater? Should we get rid of EVs? Let's talk about that. More Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio podcast to your favorite podcast player, and that's how you can subscribe to the podcast. That is for those of you listening to the broadcast right now on the radio station. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio podcast, and you'll find me. Look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and that's how you got me. Really, if you just Google search Geek Therapy Radio podcast, it'll all come up. GeekTherapyRadio.com and all the social media. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio. I'm on all the socials and YouTube and all that good stuff. Geek Therapy Radio podcast. So in the previous segment, I started to talk about EVs in the general kind of mind space that a lot of the general public that some of the general public has about electric vehicles in 2023 as of recording is the same kind of mind space the general public was in 1923 regarding the internal combustion engine, regarding the horseless carriage. In 1923, there were detractors of automobiles saying that they're useless, they're dirty, they burn fuel, they're unsafe compared to a horse. There's no use for a horseless carriage. Horses are still the way to go. That's the way people thought in 1923. Fast forward 100 years to 2023, you have EVs in the same kind of state of technology and mass adoption. EVs, as we know them, are it's a technology that's about 10 to 15 years old. I'm going to repeat this for the listeners just tuning into the radio broadcast who didn't hear the first segment. EVs as we know them. And if you go back to listen to the podcast, you can hear me make the case in the first segment. I mark EVs as we know them with the Tesla Model S that came out around 2012, 2013-ish, around that time. So fast forward 10 years, about 15 years-ish. That's the current state of EV technology as we know it. And I was drawing a parallel between the EVs as we know them right now in 2023 with combustion engine around the same time 100 years ago in 1923. The mentality exists that it's a new technology and there's a lot of detractors and EVs are useless, just like people in 1923 were saying that the internal combustion engine was useless, blah, blah, blah. So there are, when you ask somebody who hates EVs. Let's say they've just been listening to nothing but, conservative talk radio for their 40 hours a week. They've been listening to hosts on conservative talk radio bashing EVs and da-da-da-da. So obviously they don't know much about it. The listener, unfortunately, just if they're only getting their source from Fox News and conservative talk radio, they don't know 98% of the truth about EVs. But there is, typical for sensationalist media, what they do is they take a little nugget of 2% truth, and then they repeat it 1,000 times a day so that you think that it's the actual truth. If enough people are locked onto a tiny little nugget of truth, that makes the audience of millions thinks that that's the whole truth. It's a fallacy. Just because 1,000 voices are saying it 1,000 times a day doesn't mean it's the whole truth. But that's just the nature of sensationalist media. That's how they keep you locked onto the commercial break, get you all fired up, tap into your emotions, make you angry and scared about something. That's just the way it works. So let me just tell you, let me tell you what that little nugget of truth is that they lob onto. That's real. That's a real concern. And I say that as somebody who I daily drive an electric vehicle. I still have my DeLorean. I still have my gas-burning vehicles, but I also have my daily commuter is an electric vehicle, the Chevy Bolt, a 2017 Chevy Bolt. No gas at all. It's just a battery pack. Now, here's the truth that they will often bring up on, let's just call it conservative outlets that are sensationalized to that sort of bias, to the right-wing type of bias. There is truth that not only the infrastructure, as far as like charging stations and how long it takes to charge a car, that is still a concern. You know what was also a concern in 1923? Gasoline stations. Infrastructure with roads. It was the same concern for the gasoline vehicle in 1923 as it is for electric vehicle infrastructure in 2023. It's the same but different. Different but the same. But regardless, it is true. It is true that the electric vehicle infrastructure is in its infancy. It's still in its infancy. It is also true, which is very funny to me. It's hilarious to read these comments and hear these bleeding goats on the TV and radio talking about how lithium is terrible for the environment. It is true. Mining lithium and the production of electric vehicles is terrible for the environment. It just is. That is also a byproduct of a technology that is still in its infancy. So gasoline has had 100 years of research and development to pun intended, refine itself and become cleaner. Internal combustion engines have become cleaner. The gasoline that burns in the internal combustion engine is way cleaner, and it's a much more streamlined process, much better for the environment than it was when the internal combustion engine automobile was in its infancy in 1923. EVs are in the kind of the same boat, but different. Mining lithium is horrific for the environment and for people. And by the time you buy an electric vehicle, it has already done as much damage as an internal combustion engine vehicle has done within the first few years. I think the magic number for an EV is you need to own it and drive it for like 70,000 miles, somewhere around there, for it to break even with an internal combustion engine. But every mile you drive after 70,000 miles with a current generation of electric vehicle, that starts dipping into negative. Then it starts becoming more overall good for the environment. And what's funny to me, speaking of the environment, is that you hear we'll just call them bleeding goats on TV and radio talking about how bad lithium is for the environment. Since when did you start caring about the freaking environment? That's funny to me. That's funny that you'll hear the same type of host or whatever railing against environmentalists and just bashing Al Gore over the head, which Al Gore, a lot of environmentalists do deserve a lot of it. But I'm just saying they bash environmentalism and bash environmentalists and blah blah blah, and then all of a sudden when it comes to EVs, lithium is terrible for the environment. Making batteries for EVs is terrible in the environment. EVs are terrible in the environment. Oh, so the narrative changes to kind of just fit the type of fear and distrust that you're trying to manufacture and manipulate. That's how that works. Funny. Oh, it's about the environment now when it comes to EVs. That's funny. But there is a grain of truth to it. I don't mean to sound like a butthole here on the on the radio. There is a grain of truth to that. Yes, lithium is horrible. Do you know what lithium is also inside of? Do you know the lithium that they mine for electric vehicles is also in your freaking cell phone, is also in the rechargeable batteries in your controllers, your wireless mice, your whatever device you have, your digital cameras, your whatever you have that has a battery in it. That's all lithium. It all comes from the same place. Electric cars are just one product of that lithium mining, but lithium is everywhere, in every battery, in every device that you own around you. You're already using the lithium. So if you're reasoning for not getting electric cars all of a sudden that it's bad for the environment, you got to throw away your phone, you got to throw away your tablet, you got to throw away your laptop, you got to throw away your wireless mice, you got to throw away your game controllers, you got to throw away so much because it all contains lithium. But it's true that mining lithium is terrible for the environment. This is going to lead me great into segment 3, which is kind of the state of EV technology right now, where it's going to go, and it kind of ties into how gasoline became more refined over the last 100 years. Gasoline benefited from the R&D for 100 years, whereas electric vehicles have benefited from like 15 years of R&D at max. Not 15 years, but modern EVs as we know them is still in its infancy. Let's talk about where EV technology needs to go to finally become this kind of holy grail of transportation. And I'll say that before we get out of the segment right here. We are still decades upon decades, if not I'm going to say 100 years. When we talk about EV and transportation, we're just talking about kind of the consumer side of transportation. We're not talking about tractors and shipping and all sorts of things being able to convert to EV right now. We're just talking about commuting to work. But anyways, let's talk more about that. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. We're talking about EVs in this episode, specifically lithium mining in the current state of electric vehicles. It is true that mining lithium and electric vehicle production is currently terrible for the environment, especially the mining for lithium. Actually, like making the electric vehicle, putting it together and everything isn't really as different as putting together a gasoline-powered Ford F-150. Like the actual manufacturing process is just the same both ways. But mining lithium is dangerous for the environment. You know what's also dangerous for the environment is fossil fuels. Mining fossil fuels and refining fossil fuels. But before you label me some sort of tree-hugging hippie, the benefit that fossil fuels has, as far as it's way cleaner to burn, the internal combustion engine is way more efficient. The internal combustion engine is so efficient now at extracting energy from way cleaner fuel now that there wouldn't be this kind of climate crisis call to action if the internal combustion engine was as clean as it is now, way back in 1923, there wouldn't be this argument. In some cities, the exhaust coming out of like Singapore or whatever, the exhaust coming out of a gasoline engine is cleaner than the air going into it. Like burning fossil fuels now, as far as transportation, as far as gasoline is concerned, is so much cleaner than it was 100 years ago. That's a direct benefit of over 100 years of research and development. Lithium for electric cars is where gasoline for combustion engine was in 1923. That's because EVs, as we know them, is kind of a new technology. It doesn't have 100 years of R&D in refinement. We're still on lithium. That's still the best way. That's still the best source of energy density to store electrons and store electricity to run in an electric vehicle. So what we have to do is get off of lithium. You have to find... You don't just have to get off lithium for electric vehicles. You have to get off lithium for the batteries in your cell phones, for the batteries in your tablets, the batteries in your laptops, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lithium is just a dinosaur way of storing electricity. So there does need to be a breakthrough in energy storage as far as batteries are concerned. The energy density needs to keep increasing, and we need to get off of lithium, period, because lithium is a somewhat rare resource, and getting it and refining it is a filthy, dangerous process that's horrible for the environment. That's true. You'll hear conservative hosts on TV and radio saying that lithium is conveniently horrible for the environment, because conveniently being bad for the environment is okay to talk about in terms of EVs, because EVs are the devil after all, right? Anyways, we need to get off of lithium. That is a very, very true sentiment, and that is a very, very true need. This is kind of segues to the overall idea that battery technology needs to improve. Battery technology needs to advance. Remember back in the 80s, rechargeable batteries were nickel cadmium, and they held about as much charge as a heavy-duty battery. They sucked. And then nickel metal hydride came along, and they were arguably just as good in some scenarios, or better in some scenarios, than the alkaline battery was. Not totally. I'm not going to get into all the science behind the difference between disposable alkaline batteries and nickel metal hydride rechargeable batteries. One operates at a nominal voltage of 1.5. The alkaline operates at a nominal voltage of 1.5. The nickel metal hydride operates at a nominal voltage of 1.2, and blah, blah, blah. There's a little differences, and it's just, there's some applications where the nickel metal hydride will last longer in a device versus an alkaline, and vice versa for other devices. Not getting into that. The point is that energy storage in batteries has improved. So if you remember, I almost said the S word, crappy nickel cadmium rechargeables versus modern nickel metal hydride rechargeables and lithium batteries, battery technology has advanced. Now we need to advance past lithium to make a safer battery that is less flammable. When a lithium battery catches on fire, whether it's in your smartphone, your electric scooter, or electric car, or laptop, whatever, those fires are horrible, and you cannot put them out. You have to. There is some serious work that goes into trying to put a battery fire out, and basically that is to let the battery burn itself out in a safe way. Like, get the battery away from other things, contain the burning so that it doesn't burn anything else up. It's crazy how long lithium batteries burn. Like, an electric car catching on fire can burn for days and days. Like, it's nuts. And your cell phone, if that thing bursts into flames, it is going for a long time. It's basically going to be like an acetylene torch in your pocket. Lithium is dangerous. We need to get off of lithium. Much the same way that gasoline has improved over the years. Remember leaded gas? Was I even alive for leaded gas? For all the youngsters listening, when you see unleaded gasoline, it's like, well, I don't know where to find leaded gasoline, even if you could find leaded gasoline. But the point is that that refining gasoline has improved over the past 100 years. Thus, the same is true for battery and electrical storage. It needs to keep improving. One way that it has improved, or that it promises to improve, and this is kind of my segue to talking about Toyota's promises and claims. Toyota, to kind of set the backstory up a little bit, Toyota is famously kind of been behind in the electric vehicle arena. They don't have any EVs kind of as we know it, which is funny because they're the ones who came out with the Prius. They're kind of responsible for the wide adoption of hybrid technology, but they never got on the EV train. Every other major manufacturer has gotten on this electric vehicle train. Volkswagen and Mercedes and Ford and Chevy, like, they're all on board with the EV, but Toyota really isn't. They don't have an electric vehicle, a 100% electric vehicle on offer. So they've made this promise that not only are they going to start offering electric vehicles, but they're going to offer electric vehicles that have up to 745 miles of range using solid-state batteries and they will be on offer by the year 2025. Basically, what it sounds like they are overpromising. Just to be completely frank here, it sounds like Toyota is way, like Elon Musk, overpromising on what they're going to deliver as far as EVs are concerned, because this is nuts. And when poked and prodded, Toyota, like, okay, Toyota, how can you tell us about this solid state battery technology? They're very tight-lipped, which I understand a little bit, as far as, you don't want to just divulge too much information about your proprietary technology. I completely understand that part of it, but at the same time, it's like shady. It's like, do you have it or do you don't have the solid state technology? It sounds like you're making a huge claims here, but you're not giving us much information beyond that. Toyota says that they've made this progress in the prototype stage, but that manufacturing it in like mass wide scale production of it is a different story altogether. But they say they're well on their way to mass production of solid state batteries capable of 745 miles of range and charging in less than 10 minutes by the year 2027. So they want to have EVs by 2025 using liquid-based lithium batteries that offer extended range and faster charging times. They say they're going to have that by 2025, but it's the solid state batteries that charge in 10 minutes and have almost 800 miles of range that they say they're going to have by 2027. That sounds like overpromising. That because they're so tight-lipped, and like I mentioned before, I understand proprietary technology. I understand why they want to be tight-lipped, but at the same time, it's like, like I said, do you have it or do you don't? So solid-state batteries do exist. They do exist in certain limited applications and limited production. What Toyota is promising to be a game changer here is that they are promising to perfect the mass production and cheapening of solid state batteries. Solid state batteries are more energy dense, they charge quicker, they have more range because of that energy density, and they don't have that liquid electrolyte that is so risky as for fire. So solid state batteries are less dangerous, more range, and charge quicker. And Toyota is saying that yes, solid state batteries do exist in certain limited productions and limited applications, but they are promising that they've unlocked this game changer that's going to allow them to mass produce solid state batteries for use in electric cars and other applications. And they promise to have that perfected, or they say they're going to have that perfected by the year 2027, which as of recording is about 4 years away. You ever heard too good to be true? It probably isn't. That's kind of the way I personally feel about this. Like, I have a feeling, and I would love to be wrong about this, that 2027 is going to come and go, and we're not going to see this magic silver bullet EV that gets 745 miles of range and charges in 10 minutes from Toyota. I don't think we're going to see that, but I would love to be wrong. Anyways, more Geek Therapy Radio coming up. You've got your mental curator. I'm going to plug the socials here. Just type Geek Therapy Radio Podcast into any social media app, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all that good stuff, Instagram. And that's how you find me. That's how you can get in touch with me. That's how you just kind of know what I'm doing from day to day. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. Let's, and I hate this turn of phrase, let's switch gears here and talk about the iPad, or my iPad Pro that I bought a while back. Well, I've said this probably for the past couple years. I said this when I bought my first M1 MacBook Pro in the year 2020. I was like, the real winners in this kind of new Apple Silicon game is going to be when the M2 chips come out, and people are going to be able to scoop up M1 devices for half the price or a quarter, like for really cheap. Those are the real winners. They're going to get these awesome devices with this awesome chip in here without paying the Apple tax first. So, in my kind of Mac universe, I'm a PC and a Mac and an Android user. Like, I use all of it all the time. Right now, as I'm recording this podcast, I'm using my 16-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro in it that I got for a freaking steal. I traded in my M1 13-inch MacBook Pro towards this 16-inch MacBook Pro that was on a steep discount at a Micro Center, and I also got an M1 iPad Pro, also at a steep discount because all the new generation stuff's come out. So I'm one of those benefactors of buying used M1 chips when the M2 chip stuff comes out because it's a huge discount. So anyways, I want to talk about the iPad a little bit here. It's an 11-inch M1, what is it, 5th generation iPad Pro? Whatever, 4th, 3rd? I don't even know. It's an M1 powered iPad Pro. And as much hate as Apple gets, and as much hate as criticism I toss towards Apple where it's due, there is something to be said for the Mac ecosystem for certain functions between devices. For instance, the way that you can use an iPad seamlessly as an external monitor for your MacBook Pro or your Mac laptop is awesome. I already have my iPad with me. I've got my MacBook Pro with me. Click one button up there in the top right control center to either mirror the display on the iPad's display or just use it as an extended desktop over there. It's awesome. So awesome and so seamless. That is so freaking cool. I wish there was a way on the Windows side of things, on the PC side of things, to do something that seamlessly, natively. Yes, there are ways to use an Android tablet or smartphone to extend the display of your PC laptop, your Windows laptop, your Windows desktop. Yes, there's a way to do it. I use an app called Super Display, and it's awesome for that purpose. But it's not as seamless and baked into the ecosystem as screen mirroring is in between Mac OS and iPad OS. It's just one click, and there it is. It's awesome. I mean, especially for editing, for editing podcasts, for editing audio, for editing video. I can have the iPad, running my notes there in like Microsoft Word or OneNote or whatever, and then on the main bigger screen of the MacBook Pro 16-inch, I've got the editing software. I'm using DaVinci Resolve or Reaper or whatever I'm using. It's awesome. The use cases, it doesn't even need to be stated. Having multiple monitors is a productivity game changer. I mean, it has been for years and years and years. And just the way that, credit where credit's due, the walled garden of Mac allows you to use your iPad as an external display so seamlessly is amazing. It's just amazing. So with the iPad, I don't just use it as an external monitor. I try to use it day to day and for different productions. And I've said on this show before that I really wish that Reaper, which is the audio editing program, the NLE audio editor that I used for making podcasts at least, I wish Reaper, while it is on almost everything, you can get Reaper on Linux, Windows, Mac OS, of course, you can run Reaper on your Raspberry Pi. It's amazing, but it's not on Android or iOS. It's for the best audio editor I have seen for Android is called Audio Evolution. Now, there's a bunch of different music makers and things for Android, like Fruity Loop Studio is on everything. It's on iPad also, but it's not really made for podcasts, at least the way that I like to produce them. But Audio Evolution is the closest kind of like in-depth, multi-track, just audio editor that I found for Android. But it's clunky to use on a touch screen, and it's not. I've used it before. I've made podcasts and radio shows with it before, like once or twice, as a sheer like willing it into existence, because it is not nearly as easy to do as on a desktop-based NLE. But that's the audio editor that I use on Android in a pinch if I am out in the field, quote unquote, and I need to make a radio show with my phone. That's what I do. I use Audio Evolution. Now, on the iOS side of things, on the iPad OS side of things, not Final Cut. Logic Pro is on iPad OS now, and I was really hopeful this is kind of like the crux of this segment here, is that I was really hopeful that Logic Pro, let me bring it up while I'm talking about it, would be this intuitive thing to use. I don't want to use Face ID. I'm not even... Real world frustrations, real-time frustrations. There you go. It's on my face. Okay. I really wanted Logic Pro to be super useful for making podcasts on the iPad. Now, because the iPad has such amazing built-in microphones, you could totally make a radio show or a podcast using nothing but the iPad, because the microphones in it are that good. They are production ready, production quality microphones. They're usable. It's not going to replace a dedicated condenser, large diaphragm condenser microphone, but in a pinch, you use really clean audio from the microphones built into MacBooks and iPads. They're great for kind of on-the-go audio recording. They sound amazing. They sound just as good as USB condenser microphones, small diaphragm USB condenser microphones. Anyways, so I was using Logic Pro, and I was building a template in there to make a podcast. Like if I'm out and I don't want to bring my laptop or anything, and I just have my iPad with me, be able to produce an iPad. Again, it's an issue, unfortunately, of kind of willing it into existence. And here's what I've realized. Music production on tablets, and maybe some of you listening have already kind of come to this conclusion. Music production on tablets it's almost entirely under the assumption that you're going to be using loops and synthesizers and dragging and dropping and copying and pasting and using pre-made audio samples and things like that. It's kind of funny, like when you start asking it to like do a multi-track recording, like I want to record drums multi-track, I want to record vocals, and then it makes it like it's of course doable. You can absolutely do it, but the software is still assuming that most people are just going to want to be dragging and dropping samples and loops around. That's just what it caters to. And when you ask it to do multi-track stuff, it's like, okay, we'll let you, but this is not what the software is optimized for. I know that people make multi-track recordings on their iPads. I know that. They've been using GarageBand forever and Logic forever to do that kind of thing with an iPad. Maybe not Logic forever, because Logic Pro is kind of a recent thing on iPad OS. But you get my point here. The main point is that as much as I would like to use the iPad as kind of a dedicated podcast machine, at least when I travel, it's still pulling teeth. One of the things that Reaper does, and Pro Tools and different kind of desktop-based audio NLEs, DAWs do, is that you can, when you export, you can export like regions, which is important to me for radio broadcasts. I want to export between 0 and 8 minutes, and then 8 minutes and 18 minutes, and 18 minutes and 29, and then 29 to 39. Those are my 4 segments. It's pulling teeth to do that in Logic Pro. It's pulling teeth. But that's where I'm at. I'll update you with any developments on that front. You are worthy of love. You're worthy of giving love, and you're worthy of receiving love, and you're worthy of your own self-respect. Thank you so much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. I'll talk to you next time.